All right, guys, back with another video. I got an interesting topic today. We're talking about the heavyweight division. We're talking about Francis Ngannou, right? And something very interesting happened this weekend. I don't know if you guys saw it. Tyson Fury had a fight. And I don't really talk too much about boxing, but I do talk, the biggest names in sports and in combat sports. And, Tyson Fury is definitely at, the top of the list of very popular combat sport athletes that have big pay-per-view draw numbers. And Tyson Fury had his fight. He won via TKO or knockout. And then, long and behold, Francis Ngannou, the UFC heavyweight champion, steps in the ring. And they say that we need to go toe-to-toe in a boxing match to see who the biggest, baddest dude is in the world. And guys, honestly, I was sold. I just would have likened it to be a little bit more like Bad Blood. You know what I mean? Like if Francis Ngannou came in there and he was like, yo, like, you're four-letter word this, four-letter word that. We gotta get to the bottom of this. Let's do this when I'm fresh off my surgery. Let's run it. That would sell more, but either way, Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou is a massive pay-per-view card for heavyweights. And I do want to see, Francis Ngannou get his bag, as they say. I do want to see him get that $100 million payday. And I want to see Kamaru Usman get that big payday. You know what I'm saying? So, what's the game plan for the UFC? Because the UFC is going to run into a problem here. The UFC is going to run into a problem where some of their stars get too big for the sport, right? Conor McGregor, right? He was the first person ever that crossed over to a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather that Dana White, chipped himself into. And I think Dana White probably took away for the UFC, probably over 100 million plus to the UFC just from that event. But Francis Ngannou wants to re-sign with the UFC, but he said there has to be a way that we can figure out this boxing match. Like, we got to be able to put it in there so I can go over there and box. And I think that, the thing is with the UFC is if Dana doesn't do this, if Dana says there's no way you're going to box Tyson Fury under this with our contract, what's going to happen is you're going to see Francis Ngannou become a free agent. And what happens if Francis Ngannou becomes a free agent, fights Tyson Fury, gets $100 million? Do you think he really needs to come back to the UFC? If he gets 60 million, 50 million, 70 million, you guys think he really needs to come back to the UFC? Of course not. What happens if Israel Adesanya goes and fights Logan Paul, releases from the UFC, goes and fights Logan Paul, and makes 30 million, 35 million, 40 million? What happens if Kamaru Usman leaves the UFC, fights Canelo Alvarez, and makes 67 million? What happens if Nate Diaz leaves the UFC and makes 60, 70 million, 40 million, 30 million fighting Jake Paul? This is why the UFC is very smart with how they do their contracts. This is why even though you're retired, you're still under contract with them. If you have fights left with them, you're not a free agent just because you're retired. You're still under contract. And I think Dana White did that. He set up the UFC contracts, I believe, for this very reason. That if a fighter comes and he become this global star, I think Dana White was smart enough to realize that other people are going to try to put on these other shows where they can make all this money, but it's not their business module. Their business module is not set up for a Jake Paul to, go in there and box some dude inside the octagon. This is Triller. This is, Showtime. This is, their thing to do. They make the biggest boxing matches, right? So we're going to see something interesting here. What is Francis Ngannou going to do? Is the UFC going to bend a little bit and say, we'll throw that boxing match stipulation in your contract? Because if they do that, you best believe Kamaru Usman's going to want that boxing stipulation in his contract so when he can go box Canelo Alvarez. But then there's no guarantee that if they box these people, make all that money, that they're even going to come back to the UFC. There's no guarantee that Francis Ngannou makes $100 million and comes back to the UFC. He can come back for one fight and be done. So you guys see the issue that's about to, happen here when you have people like Logan Paul and Jake Paul that kind of started this whole thing. Really, Conor McGregor started this whole thing when he fought Floyd. That was the beginning of the crossover. These athletes realizing that it's not so much about, the ceiling is not just become the biggest pay-per-view star in the UFC. The ceiling can be, I can go fight one of these influencers. Now I can go make $100 million. I can make more money fighting someone who does YouTube videos than I could fighting the number one pound for pound fighter in the UFC. So this is an interesting time. We'll have to see what the UFC does, but man, it's going to be some things that happen, and it's going to be people who, well, what side are they on in their career? Are they more willing to go and bet on themselves and go test that free water? Or are they more willing to stay with the UFC? So we'll just see. But anyways, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Back in tomorrow with another video. Thank you guys so much.